Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell. Today we're going to be talking about manganese.
Hello everyone again, Bill Brush here, Modesto, California. Hey, I'm going to talk today about one of my favorite, that sounds kind of weird, but my favorite micronutrients, which is manganese. It's funny because it's confused a lot for magnesium, but this is manganese, a great micronutrient needed for lots of plant functions and really kind of undervalued because of all the really things that you need to have manganese in your plant for. And so one of the things about manganese, and over my consulting career, I could go out to any farmer almost anywhere on any crop, and after getting soil samples would tell him, well, you're low of zinc, we need to add 35 pounds of zinc sulfate on your soil, and then we'll do a little foliar zinc. And almost without fail, they all said, okay, that sounds right. Then when I came back another time and says, we're low of manganese, we're going to need to add some, both foliar and soil applied. And we're going to need to add 100 pounds per acre, and we'll get it into your foliars. Almost without fail, the question would be, well, what do we need that for? So we have a kind of opinion of farmers is that we understand the value of zinc, the need for zinc, and they've probably used it at some time and got results from adding zinc. But for manganese, they haven't really seen it because nobody's really brought it to their attention. Using the soil test that I've used for years, which is the Albrecht model that's run through Perry Ag Labs back in Missouri, they have a scale that's much higher than you'll find almost on any other manganese test. And the good thing about that, you can really hone in on when you're deficient, when you have adequate amounts, if your crop needs a lot more, where you can go to that, where's the maximum you want to get to at any one time. So it's really, really good. I mean, if I told you how much manganese where you're at, most labs would say you have enough, but not with this particular test. So if you're working on a different soil test besides the one I use, make sure that you're following the lab instructions as to where they are. It won't be as precise because this will tell you pound for pound what you're going to use and what response that will get you given that number of pounds.
Now Bill's going to talk about what manganese is.
What is manganese? And it's a very strong cation, and it's needed for several functions of the plant. One of the things it's most essential for, if you think about some of the major nutrients like phosphorus and magnesium, you really have to have manganese present so that you get efficient uptake of those two elements if you have adequate manganese. Also, it really helps in taking nitrogen in, utilizing it, and assimilating it into the plant. So not just the fact that it's taken in, but also spread throughout the plant in adequate amounts to give it proper use. It also aids in chlorophyll synthesis. So a lot of things that manganese done are usually based on having enzymes or making products inside the plant, whether they be enzymes or vitamins or other products that assist for all these others. And without it, you either restrict it or you severely slow it down. Now, one of the things, if you think about magnesium being the center of the chlorophyll molecule, well, obviously, if it aids in uptake and then aids in the chlorophyll synthesis or the manufacturing, it does it two ways, by getting adequate magnesium into the plant and then putting that magnesium and making chlorophyll synthesized, which needs magnesium. One of the things you'll notice, and this is why it's misunderstood a lot of times, you'll get a kind of what we call a mottled chlorosis, and normally we always find it in the oldest leaves. Now, plants are unique kind of in the fact that they will take and cannibalize those older leaves to keep your new growth going. So if you're short, it's going to try to keep that manganese moving towards the growing tip so that the plant continue its biological functions rather than stun it way back and not allow it to get its normal growth patterns. So by modeling those leaves, they look a lot, and this is why it's confused, they look a lot like zinc deficiency. You get a lot of interveinal chlorosis, or you get in between the veins, you'll get a yellowing greening, so that mottled color. So it looks similar, but it's uniquely different, particularly in what it does for the plants and what you need it for that plant functions. Also, it will stunt crops. It will bring it back, say something like a corn plant where you're growing an ear, it'll actually stunt the growth of that ear where it's not as long as it could have been, or not as many rows around on the ear of corn. It won't allow it to do that. The other thing that it's really, I see it a lot, is when you're trying to do fruiting, whether it's a corn plant, whether it's a walnut tree, whether it's an almond tree, whether it's anything that you're worried about, the reproductive part of that crop is essential to what you're trying to do. It basically is really necessary for what we call set. On corn, to set the kernels, walnuts, to set multiple walnuts at each fruiting site. On almonds, increasing the number of pollinated nuts that are set on the tree for production for that year. It really has multiple functions, particularly when you get the parts per million or pounds per acre up to the area that you need it. Then you really begin to see the benefit of all these. I will tell you that some crops are more sensitive, like a crop like walnuts will respond from lots of manganese. It's because on that walnut, instead of having one individual nut per flower, it has a fruiting site where you can have 3 and 4 actual nuts set on the same fruiting site. And that's a function of getting your manganese up. So instead of just setting 1 or 2 of those, it'll set up to 3 and sometimes 4. So that's something you can really take on a yield curve. On almonds, one of the things about almonds is it will set more of those. It will push out of the jacket more of those almonds so that more of them will be set. If you're short, it will slow down some of those nuts, and they will not break jackets, and they will fall off in the drop down the road in, say, May and June. So really, manganese has a lot of implications for a lot of different crops. If you have something that sets a pod, rather than setting 3 or 4 beans per pod, all of a sudden you can get out to 6 or 8. And they'll be full size. They won't be diminished in size if your fertility is adequate. So there's several things that are setting crops and improving how much you can keep. Well, a lot of people will say, well, why do, basically soil? Why don't we just foliar it? Micronutrients are not needed in high volumes in terms of pounds. Why don't we just foliar it and get by? Well, that's a nice help. But one of the things you have to understand is not having adequate manganese in your soil means I won't get the proper amount of uptake of phosphorus and magnesium. So even though I have adequate amount in the leaf, I can't get those other macronutrients into the plant. So we really need to do 2 prongs. If you're extremely deficient, put some on the soil and also try to band-aid your foliars until you can get enough coming through the soil to really see a difference. I think it always has a value in your sprays, but like I think I've said this before, when you put a foliar on, one of the things I found over my career is that they work better. There's a synergy by putting multiple amounts of micronutrients in your foliar sprays. If you just are short of manganese and you just put manganese, it will not work as well as putting on a manganese with some zinc and some iron and maybe some copper, maybe a little bit of molybdenum, those kind of things, that they actually work better together. And when I talk about, I'm going to do a whole podcast about, foliar fertilizer, what it can do and what it can't, but I'm going to save that one for a little later.
Now Bill's going to talk about the different factors that can affect your uptake of manganese.
Okay, if you've got deficiencies, some of the things that make this work are very alkaline soils, particularly when you get your pH of your soil up to 8.5 and 9, all of a sudden manganese becomes very difficult to extract from the soil. And so that's one thing that we need to work on. Highly organic soil, which means there's lots of organic material, lots of carbon that's stored up and stabilized in that soil, and that ties up manganese also and really makes your situation of trying to get it out of the soil much worse. The other side of that, I talked about very alkaline soils. When you get heavily leached, acid, sandy soils, you have a difficult time getting it into them too, because there isn't a lot of clay with which to hold these micronutrients. And so it's sometimes hard to build up your number where you'd like to get it rapidly. And when you're leaching out nutrients, particularly calcium and magnesium, you begin to close up the pore space, slow down the microorganisms, and then, of course, manganese will just be one of those that didn't get taken up because of that. One other thing that's made worse, and this happens a lot when we look at just starting in the spring. We're all in a hurry to get our planted our crops, whether they be corn or alfalfa or whatever crop we're trying to grow. We're trying to get it in. Sometimes we'll plant corn here in early April, and it'll turn cold, and we see a real slowness of them wanting to get going. Well, one of the reasons is when it's cold, manganese doesn't like to come out in these cold, wet periods. So guess what? Phosphorus doesn't like to be taken up nearly as easily, and they all kind of go downhill from there. So one of the things is that when they're prolonged, wet, cold periods, you're going to have a difficult time getting manganese into your plant. The other thing about manganese that I want to say is it can be difficult sometimes. I look at micronutrients, and they're micro for a reason, because they don't need to be there in high levels. A good manganese under my soil test would be, 100 to 150 parts per million would be excellent. Okay, if we got to those levels, we would stay there for a long time because they don't use much. But it's the presence of them in high concentrations that allows them to be taken up more easily. Well, when we go on down the line and you just start talking about, well, I don't have enough, how do I get more in? And it's all the conditions are wrong for me. Then you're going to suffer with crop struggling, your crop, whatever it is, struggling for long periods of time, trying to get going. And it's really difficult, almost with any crop, to make up for a bad start. It's just like running a race. You slip and stumble. Very rarely can you have enough energy to catch up and pass everyone and win that race. Okay? And it's just like that. It's very difficult for your crop when it starts slowly to catch up and be everything it could be. Another thing about manganese is it can be blocked. If you have other nutrients, particularly potassium and sodium, and if you're looking at, like I do, looking at a base saturation, and those two nutrients are in greater than 10% of what's on that soil colloid, it will almost block totally manganese uptake. You will see a manganese deficiency even if you have adequate amounts, but you have an excess of potassium and sodium. And I've seen this in a lot of cases where I'm thinking I'm okay, but then if you look at the entire soil picture, that whole analysis that we take, we're looking at many different things that can, have trouble picking up manganese. If you're a corn grower, one of the things that's so essential about manganese is that it is essential for the production. It produces an enzyme, and so that if manganese is not there, we don't get much of an enzyme called lignin. We have an enzyme that makes your crop produce lignin, and because of that, you will have less lignin in your stock. And what does that mean? In terms of high wind, if you don't have lignin, you have a softer, weaker stalk, which can lodge or go over. And so that is essential for in manganese. If you're looking at tree crops, just think there's a certain amount of lignin that must be produced for those limbs so that they can support the weight, not only of themselves, but of the crop that you intend to set, the amount of leaf surface, all the things we do that puts lots of stress on those limbs and joints. without the adequate amounts of manganese, you will find a hard time without breaking limbs. And so, potassium, most important thing for strength of limbs, manganese is the second. It is very, very important. So when you are short of manganese, you're looking for things like limb damage. That's a long-term problem. And probably that tree, or particularly that particular limb, has been compromised. That will never be what it could have been. If it breaks all the way off, you have an opening for disease. The tree will never be as thrifty as it was before that limb was lost. So manganese, essential for that limb strength. But if you're going out there growing corn, and there's a lot, just think of this, there are some corn plants that are built for silage that are manufactured to be low in lignin. Well, what if you then put those low lignin type corns, because they're more digestible with less lignin in that stalk, when they make silage out of them, if at that time you don't have enough adequate manganese, now you've already got a low lignin, now you can't make any lignin hardly because you don't have enough manganese to get that process started. So you can have a good variety that would make great silage, but we're not making even enough lignin for it to be able to stand for itself. And these become all issues. A lot of times I've heard many times, well, that variety just wasn't any good. Look at it. It fell over. It's no good. Look a little deeper than that. Look at when a low lignin variety has come out to give you higher digestibility. See if in fact you had a low amount of manganese in your soil. That could lead to those low lignins, which could be really good for your milk production with those silage varieties, but you have to go back and make sure you get adequate amounts of manganese into that plant to make sure lignin is formed. The other thing about micronutrients, manganese being one of them, of course, as I'm talking about it right now, is their influence on the crop that you're producing. And what I mean by that is having inadequate manganese in your daily life, meaning you're not taking it up in your food because it's not there in the soil, and so it's short in the food that you're consuming, you're going to have problems. Like, in animal life, of course, it's an essential biocatalyst for normal growth and bone development. So if you're feeding it to livestock and you got young calves and they're low of manganese in these foods or feeds that you're giving to them, you're not going to get proper bone development. It also is essential for the maintenance of your body weight. In other words, it takes and continues to feed bone development and muscle mass. So a lot of the calories you're taking in without manganese can go to fat, and basically, and your body weight can go up. Can also go the other way, where it doesn't allow the proper assimilation of nutrients into your body, and you can struggle to gain weight. So it makes a lot of difference on young livestock, young people, getting a proper amount of manganese into the diet and those products that it makes and synthesizes, both in enzymes and vitamins and other nutrients that are into your body that are made because of manganese. It gives you the proper functioning of reproductive and mammary glands. So guess what? If you're a dairyman, I guess those two things, breeding back, having calves, more calves to put back into your herd, and also keeping good health of the mammary system, which is what you're using for milk production, those things are essential, and manganese has a huge effect on that. It activates calcium, phosphorus, iron, and most of the other nutrients, has a lot of activation, particularly in your body. If you look at a good multivitamin, you'll find it's got a fair amount of manganese in it. And what you're feeding your livestock, if you're feeding it a mineral, look for the manganese in there. If you are having trouble breeding back your livestock, look at manganese and see if it has the proper amount in what you're feeding them. Not just in a mineral package you're getting, but what's in the silage, what's in the hay. Having tests of those to understand you have adequate amounts of these will really help you long term. It also aids in the promotion of a lot, and we hear a lot of this going on today, healthy guts. The healthy gut, being able to do that. Well, one of the things that obviously, if it's healthy, it basically is able to derive the proper nutrition from what you're feeding it and how it gets fed. And so when you're looking at manganese and it's improving the microbiology in the flora of your gut, think what that does to a cow and that four stomach thing that cattle have, the four stomachs it has, and getting the proper biology working there to break down feed and turn those into milk and energy. I mean, these things all are essential for manganese. So hopefully I've given you a lot of information today that's shown you how important manganese is, not only just to the plants, but for you and other livestock, and making sure we get enough manganese. It's kind of the overlooked micronutrient. Not a lot of emphasis has been placed on it. It's just one of them, and as long as you look like you have enough, then that means, okay, I guess I don't need to worry about that one. It has a lot of benefits from being towards the excellent side rather than being on the adequate side. So if I can review a little bit about manganese and how important it is. As you can see, it's essential for the uptake of a lot of the macronutrients and the utilization of those macronutrients once they get into the plant. Also, it has essential enzymes that are used in photosynthesis. They're used in respiration. They're used in the energy transfer that we get from respiration. Manganese is essential in all those. Also, it has many problems that show up in plants when there's a deficiency. And one of the things that I see, because it's kind of overlooked, nobody's really looking to make sure I have enough manganese. And by the time you see a deficiency symptoms, and this could be true of all micronutrients, once you see a deficiency symptom, you're way down the road from having problems. You already have issues if you're seeing problems in your leaf. It's reacting to what it can pick up through soil and other measures like foliars that you've given it to. But if you see these striped mottled leaves, well, you have extreme deficiencies are showing up. They are, you are having a deficiency before you ever see any symptom. And then when you see symptoms, you're way past where you're going to have the best result. So it's best to start, as I like to say, with a full stomach to start your crop on its way to growing and getting your soil balanced so that it has all these micronutrients. I talked before something that really is important. When you look at any life, we all need the same things, whether it's humans or livestock, pets, plants, microbiology. They all need water, and they all need air, and they all need essentially the same nutrients. And there's about 17, 18 essential nutrients that each plant, animal, microbe, all of those need to have for proper healthy functioning. And because of that, manganese is one of them, and often overlooked. A lot of times somebody will say manganese and someone will think they said magnesium, and they go, well, I've got enough. And they probably do have enough magnesium, but they don't have enough manganese. So next time you're looking at a fertilizer or a soil test, you're looking at your most recent soil test, look at the level of manganese. And whatever your lab you're looking at, we want to be on the high side, on the excellent side, not just on the adequate side. You'll find most crops will respond to it, and you will prosper because of larger crops, better quality, and maybe the difference between it standing up in a windstorm and falling down. So this is Bill Brush. Till next time.
Thanks for that, Bill. I'm sure everyone very much so enjoyed what you had to say about manganese, not to be confused with magnesium or manganese. Make sure to stay tuned for more episodes of Agriculture in a Nutshell coming every other week. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and always stay curious.